Welcome to tonight's program. I hope you learn a little something about South Whitley that you may not have known. So here we go. In many ways, the town of South Whitley is considered a small, rural, Midwestern community, but when it comes to the businesses and industries that have produced many fine products throughout history, South Whitley is proud to be known on both a national and global level. Tonight, I hope you enjoy this program that will take us through a brief look at some of these products. The amount of things we can claim is numerous, so here's just a few examples to be celebrated. Sam Sycophus came to South Whitley in 1838 and was the first to handcraft wagons. He also ran a sawmill and hotel along with his wagon-making business. In 1855, William Dunlap had the next wagon-making endeavor at the corner of Columbia and Maple Streets. Next came the most notable wagon and buggy works business in town and was ran by Morton G. Rupley. He not only ran the shop, but was a blacksmith too. Morton ran his buggy shop from 1883 to 1932 on the east side of State Street. During this time in the 1920s, John Beeching made run light wagons also. The history of Reed Murdoch began on the banks of the Mississippi River more than 10 years before the first transcontinental railroad spanned the country. Simon Reed and Thomas Murdoch opened their business with the fundamentals of good values and fair dealings. This made their little business prosper and grow through the following years. On February 1st, 1865, the business partners moved their business to River Street in Chicago, Illinois. They occupied a 4-story building there until the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, when the building and its contents were destroyed. Within 3 weeks, a new lot was purchased, a new building erected, and Reed Murdoch Company was doing business as usual. In 1901, the first separate factory was built in Pearson, Indiana for the manufacture of Monarch ketchup and chili sauce. Eventually, another factory was in operation in South Whitley. In August 1930, the South Whitley plant had started operations with over 300 tons of tomatoes delivered here. Tomatoes were reduced to pulp and processed into tomato juice. Bushels of tomatoes from local farms would await processing at the South Whitley plant. Robert English became the plant manager and remembered a very successful season when the plant put up over 130,000 cases of tomato juice. Here is a newspaper advertisement from August 7, 1947 that shows the company was looking for both male and female seasonal workers. Their season ran from the 1st of August until the first big frost. South Whitley's plant employed up to 150 people. One remembrance stated that the plant used German prisoners from the Fort Wayne prison camp. These German soldiers were brought here by the bus for the third shift production. No one in the community was aware of their nightly visits except for the owner of the restaurant that is now Corner Cafe. The restaurant prepared hamburgers for them for their dinners. The company announced they planned to close the plant in March 1949. The juice machinery was moved to the Pearson factory, but the South Whitley property was used as an operating headquarters for tomato field operations. Gripco. Gripco is formerly known as the Gripnut Company, was founded in Oak Park, Illinois in 1904 in the basement of the Kenilworth Washing Machine Company. From the beginning, Gripco had an association with South Whitley. One of the founders of the company, E.R. Hibbard, was also part owner of the A to Z Printing Company, a South Whitley business for several years. In 1906, the holdings of the Gripnut Company was moved to South Whitley and shared the building with the A to Z Printing Company. Gripco's first product was a jam nut, which held a first or home nut in position. In 1913, the company began the process of manufacturing hot press nuts, and another building was added for that purpose. In the summer of 1930, the production was consolidated in the Chicago plant. In 1940, the South Whitley facilities were enlarged and the Chicago operation was closed. At this time, the company again expanded its line to include a lock nut suitable for industrial use. By 1950, the Grip Nut Company was adding efficiency and economy to the American industry, and employment nearly doubled. By 1959, Heliocoil Corporation purchased the company and left its headquarters in Danbury, Connecticut. In 1966, another 30,000 square foot plant was built in Montpelier, Indiana, and by 1980, after 2 additions to the Montpelier plant, it boasted a total of 120,000 square feet. Going back to 1977, the controlling interest in Heliocoil Corporation was acquired by the Mike Corporation of New Haven, Connecticut. At the height of the business, Gripco used 20 million pounds of steel annually and produced 5 million parts daily. In June 1985, Mike Corporation was purchased by the Emhart Corporation and became part of the Fastener Group. In 1989, Emhart again sold the company to Black & Decker. Black & Decker owned it for 8 years before they closed the South Whitley plant and moved all operations to Montpelier because the plant was bigger. In 1888, the Creamery Packet Company was built on the site of current-day Whitley manufacturing. The creamery not only made butter, but it also manufactured butter tubs from local wood supplies. In 1893, a massive fire destroyed both the building and the business. The fire had started when someone threw a match into a large pan of varnish in which they dipped their tubs. While trying to put out the fire, the pan of varnish fell over and the fire spread. The creamery burnt completely to the ground. The Eel River Valley Creamery is probably the best known of the 3 creameries that have graced our town. It was south of the bridge on what would later become Johnson Brothers Neon Sign Company. Here is a photo of Albert Vincent Holloway making butter at this creamery. He opened the Eel River Valley Creamery in 1905 after moving here from nearby Wabash County, Indiana. During the flood of 1913, 3 foot of water poured into the building, covering the entire first floor, including the equipment. The creamery recovered from the flood and continued operations until 1924, when Albert Holloway died of Bright's disease, an illness that is known today as kidney disease. The creamery was subsequently closed. The third creamery that was believed to actually have been the first creamery here in South Whitley was located on Front Street in 1882. Not much is known about this creamery, but in some of Marion's records, she has it noted that it was known as the Warren Creamery and was owned by Esta Fox. It was apparently torn down in 1929. You can't have butter being made in town without having something delicious to put it on. In 1883, Johnny Shore opened his bakery at 103 South State Street. This bakery became the first of many bakeries to call South Whitley home over the years. 7 years later, in 1890, Wesley Sickfoos opened his cafe and bakery at 204 South State Street, and for 22 years was the lone bakery in town. With the retirement of Sickfoos, many other bakeries opened across town. In 1914, Janss's Bakery opened across the street in what is now part of Carol's Corner, where the Ideal Lady Dress Shop once stood. And this is a picture of Mr. Sickfoos with his son Boyd. In 1915, Michael Robert McGlennon opened City Bakery on the east side of State Street. Other bakeries included the Herr Brothers Bakery that operated in 1926 to 1937. And baking must have been in the McGlennon genes because George and Howard McGlennon operated a bakery in the building behind the G&G grocery store from 1933 to 1956. In 1956, the McGlennons sold their business to Harley Grewell. Harley operated the business until his death in June 1975. After his death, Harley's son Robert took over operating the business along with his wife Charlene. They ran the bakery until 1976 when they moved to Fort Wayne. The printing business and printed products were one of the longest continuous commerce endeavors in South Whitley's history. On August 1st, 1896, the A to Z printing company that was headquartered in South Whitley began as a printer with the purchase of the South Whitley News from R.J. Emerson. The South Whitley News was then reissued as the Whitley County News, and in the August 4th, 1899 issue, an A to Z historian gave the account of the company's growth during its first 3 years and described the current plan. Frank Miner and the A to Z company continued to print the South Whitley newspaper until 1914. The A to Z printing company contained offices, a bindery, a trimming room, folding areas, and a press room. It was considered to be the largest printing company in the Midwest at the turn of the century. In 1905, it was believed the company shipped the largest load of printing ever made in the United States by shipping 10 railroad cars full of advertised printing matter. The company constantly ran 4 large meal flatbed presses and produced everything from almanacs to cookbooks. A to Z had great success and was very good for South Whitley in the early 20th century. The company moved out about 1914. It later returned to occupy the building that eventually became Chamberlain Products at the end of Broad Street. Unfortunately, after it moved, it never regained its local or national prominence. In March 1921, the employees of the former A to Z printing plant were given a 2-week enforced vacation so that the company could make preparations to begin printing the Specialty Salesman magazine, which was published for the next number of years. And I actually have a copy of one of our Specialty Salesman magazines over there. The printing business didn't stop in South Whitley though, with the closure of A to Z Printing Company. In 1926, Hubert A. Stump, along with his wife Damaris, founded Stump Printing Company after having owned and published the South Whitley Tribune for 10 years. His wife, Mr. Stump, died on December 29, 1949. His wife Damaris sold the company to Leland Rauch on March 1st, 1955. Mr. Rauch retained the name of the company. He only owned the company for a short period of time before he sold it again to Hamilton Green in 1957. When Ham Green and his wife Arlene purchased the company, it was located at the site of the packaged liquor store. The company shortly outgrew these quarters and a new building was built at the junction of State Roads 5 and 205. Under Ham Green's leadership, the company grew to become the nation's largest firm specializing in prom and party decorations. In January 1975, Paul Moyle bought the company from the Greens and the company grew again. By 1990, when Paul's son Shep purchased the company, customers came from all 50 states and 20 countries, including Jordan, Poland, France, and Japan. Stumps acquired the old Gripcoat building in 1999, taking the company back to where A to Z Printing was once housed. By 2002, the company became known as Shindig's. The company continued to print party supplies, and in 2003, they formed an alliance with Amazon.com and started selling their goods over the internet. It was announced in December 2021 that Stump's Shindig's would cease operations permanently. Not much is known about this briefly made product in South Whitley. The Anacycle was a children's toy that had an animal body mounted on a tricycle form. Mr. Franklin C. Kime owned the business on Broad Street sometime around 1930. There are conflicting reports of when in the 1930s it was actually manufactured. The Anacycle was stated to be the only manufacturing company to make miniature racetracks in lengths of 25 by 40 feet and 25 by 60 feet with 15 animals on each track. There were several different kinds of animals manufactured, including ponies, rabbits, lambs, kittens, and whippet dogs. They were all made of cast aluminum and mounted on steel. Local merchants collaborated with the company to give away 10 ponies at drawings held each successive Saturday until Christmas. A short time after the initial production was underway, the company encountered difficulties and ceased operations. The pony anacycles are collector's items today. Two authentic confectionery stores have a place in the South Whitley's local history. The first one was at Columbia and State Street and was owned by Phil Parrott, whose family founded the town. This candy store was demolished in April 1923 to make room for Fred Norris's drugstore. The most famous of the two stores was definitely the Stellar Candy Company. Charles Christian Stellar, more affectionately known as CC, opened his little confectionery just north of the State and Front Street intersection. He sold his fancy fruit and homemade candies from 1898 to 1931. Mr. Stellar was born in Germany in 1847 and came to America when he was just 2 months old. He was also a resident of Servia, Indiana, where he served as postmaster for 20 years before coming to South Whitley. Cece's little store was a favorite for youngsters. Homemade candy was a featured item that brought the children in. The showcases displayed a wide variety of penny candy, including candy bars, the ever-popular stick candy, and chewing gum. On the back wall, shelves were lined with all kinds of bulk candy, and there were big glass jars filled with toasted and white marshmallows, red and black jawbreakers, and home-roasted peanuts. Mr. Stellar also had a popcorn machine placed on the street front that would be full of popcorn on Saturday nights and special days. His little shop was sold in 1931, shortly after his unexpected death on February 28, 1931. Sorry about that. 3 miles south of South Whitley at the corner of State Road 5 and County Road 800 South in what is now Rife's Painting lies the former Sherburne Brickyard. Bricks were manufactured by hand during the last 3 decades of the 1800s until 1915 and played an integral role in the early history and development of Whitley County. John M. Sherburne was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania on September 29, 1854, and came to Whitley County with his parents in the early 1870s. After his arrival, he bought an 80-acre farm where he lived and established his brickyard on a 20-acre site. The brickyard was established with 2 buildings, a brick-making machine called a pug mill that was operated by horsepower, and a large kiln where the firing was done. There was also an open-air drying floor of leveled clay, covered with a layer of fine sand, and a pole-type drying shed that was roofed with a sand-covered hard clay floor. Clay of high iron oxide content that was used in the mixing process was dug from the south 10 acres of his 20-acre site. The high iron content gave the finished bricks a nice red color when they were fired. The clay was shoveled into a dump wagon and taken to a brick machine site and stored in a ground pit for the next day's use. The 6-brick mold was a wood frame tray constructed of 1/2 inch of lumber, reinforced at the top edges with metal strips, and a metal strip across the top edge of each of the 5 dividing sections. It had a wooden pull handle at one end, and an open slot at the bottom of each individual mold permitted the excessive moisture to be forced out of the plank press when it came down on it. Each brick measured 4 1/4 by 8 3/4 by 2.5 inches, and the mold was about 11 by 29 by 3 overall. 2 brick molds were still in existence in 1979. Mr. Lester Dimmick, John Sherman's granddaughter, had one, and Darley Barn Primitives had the other. The bricks were hauled on a wooden wheelbarrows to the open-air drying area. When they were dry, they were again loaded onto wheelbarrows to the open air. They were again loaded onto wheelbarrows and taken to the drying shed. They were placed there until they were ready for the firing kiln. Drying days were rarely when it rained, as rain would turn the green bricks into a wet mass that could not be fired. The kiln was of hard brick wall construction with an open top. The fire and several furnaces were placed at intervals inside the kiln. The fires burned day and night for 10 to 14 days to fire the green bricks. Mr. Sherman would use a tall ladder to climb on top of the kiln, where he would look to see if the bricks were fired to the desired shade of red. When they had fired enough, the fires were subsided and they would be removed and hauled away immediately for buyers to use for construction of schools, houses, churches, or other selected products. This was a summer-only operation. Manufacturing of bricks continued until 1915, and the buildings were torn down a short time later. The house on the left is a house that John Sherman had built for his parents on 450 West that is still in existence today and is owned by his great-great-grandson, Kendall Burkholder. The house on the right is a house on 800 South that we believe was made out of Sherman bricks. Mr. Sherman died on October 5th, 1944. What was known locally as the Hoop Mill Company was started in the late 1890s. Mr. Hook came from southern Indiana and built a 3-story building that was the first factory that made butter tubs. The building unfortunately burned down completely 3 or 4 times. The last time it was rebuilt by Aaron T. Vail, who with his brothers formed the Vail Cooperage Manufacturing Company. He came here from Markle in 1907. They confined their business to barrel heading and making staves. Several Chicago men then owned the company before 1945 under the name Hoosier Hoop Company. Here is the Hoop Mill Gang, as they were known. During their operation here, they only employed 25 to 30 men. In April of 1933, the Decatur Cooperage bought the mill from Mr. Saria of Fort Wayne for $2,000. J.A. Botterin was named the manager. He had previously been employed by the Vail Cooperage Company. The plant had been idle for several years. Work then resumed and eventually employed 60 to 70 men. In addition to making hoops for tobacco and cracker barrels, the company also made kegs. George Toney was the keg assembler. These tubs and barrels were made out of maple wood and the company had local timber buyers. The local timber they bought from were from Tom and Harry Wright, Hugh Merrick, and Walter Leslie, to name a few. The hoops were shipped to North Carolina and other eastern states by railroad cars. Employees were paid a rate of 15 cents an hour. Making the barrels was a time-consuming process. Logs were hauled to the mill site and pulled up by chain to the second floor and trimmed. Another machine would saw the logs into the proper length and width for the hoops. The strips were placed in a large wooden vat where they were steamed. A boiler heated the water to produce the steam. They were taken to a rolling machine for the desired circumference, then to the trimming machine. They were then tied in bundles and sent to the shipping room in the building where the old Northern Indiana Poultry Company was located. The manufacturing of trailers has been a part of our local community for nearly 80 years. When F.R. Bratton came to South Whitley from Elkhart, he purchased what was known as the Hoop Mill Factory and reopened the inoperable plant. In August 1945, he closed the mill and began remodeling the business with the intention of building farm trailers and caravan-type trailer houses. This began the foundation for Whitley manufacturing. With the sawmill, he had the equipment to cut lumber for the trailers he produced. A finishing department and office space were added in 1947 and a paint shop in 1948. Unfortunately, the paint shop was destroyed by fire in 1951. A new concrete shop was built and work continued. In January 1963, another fire completely destroyed the entire facility. Bratton decided to rebuild at the South Whitley location. By July 1963, part of the total facility was ready for occupancy, with a second building being completed in August. The same year, Whitley Manufacturing began to build offices and bank units as well as mobile homes. The company's attendance at the 1947 trailer show in Philadelphia boosted the company into a national profile. The trailer was given away as part of a Queen for a Day contest, and as part of the prize package, the trailer with a bath and shower included was the top prize. In 1949, baths were standard in all units over 27 feet. At the same trade show, a partnership was formed between Whitley Manufacturing and Williams Mobile Offices. By 1965, the production of mobile homes was phased out, and then Bratton retired in 1970. He sold the company to Williams Mobile Offices of Baltimore, Maryland. F.R. Bratton died in 1974. Whitley Manufacturing again announced plans to expand its operation under the leadership of General Manager Simon Dragan. A new two-story office building, a new warehouse, and a large area for storages of completed units was part of the 1984 expansion. Expanded plans also added a welding shop and possible demolition of the paint shop. In 1993, Simon Dragan bought the company and established the headquarters here in South Whitley. The company currently has plants in Washington State, Pennsylvania, and Rochester, Indiana, as well as South Whitley. At present, the company manufactures modular units for all industries and is a leader in the field of modular construction. Nutritional research. Nutritional research, that was known locally as the Carrot Factory, was founded by 5 original members of the Quintrex Corporation on November 5, 1934. The business soon dwindled to 2 men, and the name officially changed to the Nutritional Research Associates Incorporated on March 28, 1935. Dr. Albert F. O. Gehrman served as the firm consultant, and Dr. Vernon Jersey served as consulting chemist. An abandoned building containing 3,000 feet of floor space at 407 East Broad Street was purchased from the Robert E. Hicks estate on August 6, 1935, and would become the headquarters of the factory. The 2 PhDs set out to squeeze the yellow from a carrot. The yellow is a provitamin A, which the human body can convert to vitamin A vitamin needed for healthy humans and animals. The original purpose of the business was to extract pure keratin from carrot oil to supply provitamin A to baby formula. The company went on to manufacture multiple vitamins, minerals, supplements, and many specialty items. It was in the specialty items for animals where the most growth occurred. They supplied products for goats, caged birds, chinchillas, and rabbits. Zoos were a large user of their products, especially for flamingos to keep their color pink. In 1957, Albert Al Gehrman Jr. joined his father in learning the business. In 1972, Dr. Gehrman resigned and Al became president of his father's company. Dr. Gehrman died in 1976, and Dr. Jersey died in September 1984. The company continued to grow. For an interview with the Fort Wayne News Sentinel, Al Gehrman told about the extracted oil from the carrots. For humans, the carrot oil was used in capsules, and for animals, it was given as a supplement to provide a richer coat. Because it was a vegetable oil, nutritional researchers' carrot oil was mixed with margarine to give it a yellow color, because without the carrot oil, it would look like lard. Nutritional research also had a metals division for the manufacture and fabrication of cages, feeders, and other products related to animal care. They were pioneers in their industry, and their products were shipped to states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, Texas, and California, as well as Indiana. In the early morning of December 23, 2004, a fire completely destroyed all the buildings, its machinery, and its inventory. A great many of those large illuminated signs you see outside of restaurants, banks, and other businesses were manufactured here in South Whitley at the Johnson Brothers Neon Sign Company. The company got its start in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1929 when brothers Harold and Paul Johnson began bending tubing, designing, and painting signs. During the Great Depression, Harold moved to South Whitley and he continued to bend the neon tubing and fabricate metal signs. As his business continued to grow, he called on his brother Paul, who had moved to Indianapolis, for help. Together, the brothers opened the Johnson Brothers Neon Sign Company in 1938 at the corner of State and Mulberry Streets on the second floor of the building where G&G Grocery Store was eventually housed. As the business grew, more room was needed, and the brothers built a facility south of the bridge on State Street in 1958, with the sign serving as an example of their work. The business expanded rapidly, and 3 generations of the family kept the business in operation for nearly 90 years. The company designed, engineered, manufactured, installed, and serviced plastic and neon signs within a 50-mile radius of South Whitley. The company eventually joined forces in 2015 with the Indiana Sign Works and moved to Fort Wayne. Sorghum. Sorghum molasses is a syrup made from the juice crushed out of sorghum cane and served as a substitute for sugar. Many local farmers produced a large cane crop each year to provide a few gallons of sorghum syrup. In Cleveland Township, there were 2 full-scale sorghum mills in operation in the early to mid-1900s. The first one was owned by Guy Angel near the junction of Kaiser Road and State Road 14 east of South Whitley. The other was owned by Lurt Ray, who had a farm 1 mile south of Collimer. The Ray Mill operated from 1909 to 1938. Farmers would plant cane seeds saved from the previous year's crops around May or June of each year. It was harvested like corn and was usually isolated from other crops. The farmers would harvest the crop in September or early October. As part of the growing season, the sorghum plants were thinned so they could grow strong and sturdy and to get enough sunlight for a good supply of sorghum juice. The stalks were then cut off at the base and stacked as quickly as possible to protect the cane juice so stalks wouldn't dry out. The canes were then hauled by wagon to the local mills for crushing and converting into delicious syrup. The mill consisted of 3 heavy rib metal crushing rollers about 18 inches long and 9 inches in diameter. The rollers pressed the juice from the cane as it was fed into the mill. The raw juice was prepared for boiling off or cooking down. It was poured between several layers of screening to remove bits of leaves and other debris. Once it was sifted, it was ready for the boiling process. The raw cane juice was prepared for boiling off or cooking down. It was poured between several layers of screen to remove bits of leaves and other debris. Once it was sifted, it was ready for the boiling process. There were 2 barrels, one to be filled while the other 2 were emptied. A third container gave the juice time to settle. A number of impurities would settle in the bottom. If it wasn't allowed to settle, the bits would collect in the evaporator and it would burn in the bottom. Once the strained juice was poured into the boiler pan and brought to a boil and foam rose to the top, a mesh skimmer was used to remove the undesirable boil off. The juice would boil for 3 to 4 hours to produce 8 to 10 gallons of syrup. The Ray mill would process 70 to 80 gallons of syrup in a 12-hour day. While doing my research, I found that 3 wagon loads of crushed sorghum cane would produce 60 gallons of sorghum juice, and 10 gallons of juice produced just 1 single gallon of molasses after cooking. In November 1976, Dwyer Instruments broke ground on a new South Whitley plant on the north side of town. The plant was finished in 1977 and production began. Dwyer Instruments was founded in Chicago, Illinois in 1931 as F.W. Dwyer Manufacturing Company. The headquarters moved to Michigan City in 1955. The main products they would manufacture were sensors, instrumentation, and controls for HVAC, process automation, and building automation markets. They had a long history in designing and manufacturing measurement sensors. The South Whitley plant also manufactured several types of low-pressure air and gas measurement instruments, such as those shown above. These products found uses in a variety of applications, including airflow and air conditioning and air filter systems, measuring the flow of exhaust gas in smokestacks and chimneys. The sensors would also monitor blood pressure in kidney dialysis machines. These products were shipped out on a global scale. They also helped supply gauges for HVAC units, data centers, hospitals, and clean rooms, which are controlled environment rooms to minimize airborne particles like dust, bacteria, and aerosols. Here is an aerial view of what the Dwyer plant looked like. Unfortunately, in 2003, rumors started to fly about trouble at the local plant when the machinery started being moved out and taken to the other local area plants. It was finally confirmed in June 2003 that South Whitley's plant would close at the end of the year, putting about 90 people out of work. And last but not least, I couldn't do a products program without including Fox Products and its musical instruments. After a storied career that spanned 27 years from 1922 to 1949 with the Chicago Symphony as the principal bassoonist, native South Whitley son Eugene Fox decided to move his family back to South Whitley. While Hugo was living in Chicago, he became an instructor of bassoon at Northwestern University for 15 years. It was during this period of time that he studied the acoustics of the bassoon as an instrument and developed a desire to experiment with those acoustics. In 1949, upon Hugo's return to South Whitley, he decided to work on these acoustics, and that prompted him to form Fox Products in a modified chicken coop and manufacture his instruments there. In 1951, Hugo Fox finished his first bassoon, and in the May 15, 1952, South Whitley Tribune, it was reported that South Whitley High School had purchased the school's first bassoon that was manufactured at Fox Products. Around 1960, Hugo's son, Alan, left his career as a chemical engineer to come home and take over his father's company due to Hugo's failing health. In 1969, Hugo suffered from a series of strokes and died in December 1969. Alan, not a musician, began to research acoustics and board dimensions so he could manufacture a contrabassoon. The first contrabassoon to be produced in North America was the Fox Model 900 in 1970. The same year, Fox Products partnered with its first international distributor in Edinburgh, Scotland, UK. 2 years later, in 1972, the Renard line of bassoons was introduced. Fun fact, Renard means fox in French. In 1974, Fox Products decided to introduce another musical instrument, the Fox oboes. Unfortunately, tragedy would strike the company with a devastating fire on September 27, 1974. The fire destroyed the reed-making equipment and wood shop, resulting in over $150,000 in losses. Until a new facility could be built, Fox Products used other local sites throughout South Whitley to keep Hugo's legacy alive. The construction on a new facility took approximately 2 years and was opened in 1976. In February 1982, Fox Bassoon manufactured its 10,000th bassoons. The Model 201 short-bore professional bassoon was kept by the factory and placed with museum pieces. Fox had two large expansions in 1988 and 1996. In the middle of these two expansions, in 1991, the thick-walled instruments were introduced. The first Fox English horns were rolled out in 1999 and included models 500, 510, and 520, as well as the Renard Model 555. In 2012, Allen retired and sold the business to Tony Starkey. He was named the president in January of that year. 4 years later, in 2016, Fox Products opened a second South Whitley location to bring its silver plating in-house. 2018 saw the introduction of maple oboes. They introduced the Sayen Fox Model 880 maple oboe. In 2019, Tony's son Gabe took over as the new president under the leadership of his father, who retained position of CEO of Fox Products. Alan Fox died in November 2023. Thank you all for coming this evening, and I hope you all learned a little something new about these products and the businesses that produce them in South Whitley and the surrounding area. There are a few samples of some of these products on the table tonight. Are there any questions or comments?
How much did those people, the candy place where they made the ketchup, said they had high wages? What were their high wages? Did you ever find out?
No, it didn't say what their wages were. That was one of the few it didn't say the wages for. But it was, being that it was in the Great Depression, I'm sure it wasn't much. But they considered high wages. It wouldn't be high wages now.
I don't think things can cost what they do now either.
Yeah.
It's relevant.
So I hope you all enjoyed yourselves, and thank you for coming tonight.